Welcome to another edition of the Skillsminer podcast. In this episode, Kirsty and I are joined by Douglas Morrison. Douglas does a lot of work in the construction space with built environment smarter transformation. In our conversation, we touch on lots of things around construction skills, transferable skills, and challenges for the construction and built environment sector. Enjoy listening. Hello and welcome to another edition of the Skillsminer podcast. And today I'm delighted to say that Kirsty and I are joined by Douglas Morrison. And Douglas is joining us from the Built Environment Smarter Transformation organisation, where he sits as deputy chair. And he's also chair of the South Lanarkshire College. So thank you for joining us today, Douglas. Good to see you.
Likewise, Dinah.
So, Douglas, we've been sort of working with you with some of the things around BEST, built environment work, and also with colleges. So, do you want to tell us a little bit about what you do in those roles that you have and how you reach those sort of places in your career?
Yeah, certainly. That's a long and winding story. I don't think we'll have time for all of it. But yeah, at Built Environment Smarter Transformation, we are Scotland's National Innovation Centre for the built environment. We are super passionate about accelerating the built environment's just transition to zero carbon. Strong elements of social justice in what we do, a lot of industry support, but really working between industry, academic, public sector clients and citizens to support that journey towards a lower carbon future. As you've mentioned, I also work with South Lanarkshire College. So most of my career was actually spent in the college sector. Huge advocate for skills system in Scotland. I think there's some wonderful work that's being done. And really my role there is to support the team at the college to deliver an education and skills provision that meets the needs of the local and regional communities, and it's such a great privilege to support the college in that way.
So when you say it's a long and winding road, how did you end up in that position? Can you give us a potted history, a little mini version?
Yeah, certainly. So I actually started my career in the Royal Navy, so I was a weapons engineer, and had a really great experience, travelled the world, but was very young and so wanted to come back to Scotland, where I took a very random decision to become a stonemasonry apprentice. And so went into the apprenticeship system. Was supported by some wonderful apprenticeship officers within CITB, the Construction Industry Training Board at the time, who for a period of 4 years just dragged me kicking and screaming at some points through the apprenticeship. But I have to say, having started as I think it was probably the worst apprentice in the UK at the time. In my early days as a stonemason, I really struggled with it. Just wasn't so good with my hands. Was really blessed to have tradespeople, supporting infrastructure, amazing lecturers who just gave me time. They gave me time, their experience, their insight, their patience, everything I could ever have asked for and more. And so having qualified as a stonemason, an opportunity to take on a lecturing role within the local college had emerged, and just that chance to go into the education system and give a little bit of that back, that experience that had taken me from a very, very poor apprentice to an apprentice that done okay in the end and ultimately become a tradesperson, was just a really nice opportunity. Long story short, spent 16 years as a lecturer, a series of middle and senior management roles within the college sector, but have always been really passionate about supporting marginalised groups and communities. You're really passionate about technology and the role that technology can play in driving better outcomes, and also just really passionate about the power of change and innovation. And so, kind of 4 and a bit years ago, took the quite scary initially move to jump over to Construction Scotland Innovation Centre, as it was at the time, now BEST, and to really focus that energy and those passions in supporting the whole sector to make big transitions that drive social and environmental value for the citizens of Scotland and beyond.
And my goodness, we can see that in your work, and actually even when you come to visit Best as well, it's the education is in the absolute heart of everything that you're doing. Even, the factory floor and the products that are there, and the journey that you can go on as well, round about all of that, and then the learning space as well. So I just think it's fantastic, and it's great to see that actually in the heart of it, or rather it being sort of disjointed from the actual connected purpose of what you're there to represent and do. So it's a real meeting of worlds in lots of ways. And I think I'd like to understand a little bit about how you see Best across Scotland and across the UK right now, in terms of the network that's forming round about that and how important that is.
Yeah. No, I mean it's something that we're constantly thinking about within Best. Is really, as a fairly small organisation. So we have 36 employees, but we're trying to change the world.
Mm-hmm.
So we're very small with big ambitions, and we recognise that we're not going to have the impact that we want to see on our own. So developing that network, developing that community of like-minded stakeholders has been really important for us. But I think one of the things that we've always held very close, to our thinking in terms of what we do as an organisation, is a very strong commitment to avoid displacement, to avoid duplication, skills and training sense. You're right, Kirsty. We do a huge amount in terms of upskilling our workforce. From the very early stages of their career to very established professionals who are getting towards the end of their career. So in that respect, we're really agnostic as to who we work with. But we're there to provide support in areas where it's not readily available elsewhere. And we do that through partnering with other organisations who have skills, expertise, experience that we can provide a platform to. So, it's a very collaborative approach to what we offer. Everything that we do is co-designed and co-delivered with partners who, as I say, are aligned to their mission. And over the years, we've been able to support thousands of individuals and businesses to develop in those areas that they think they might be able to create competitive advantage.
Yep, it's interesting as well, thinking about the processes, and not just even in your own title, but that actual process of transition, and how we collaborate in this space as well, how we're bringing those partners together in order to transition in a more effective and cost-effective way for business at this time. It is a challenging time, there's no doubt about it, for those businesses at this moment in time. What do you think? What kind of is the key if you like, component parts of that you see as being I guess, like the secret sauce that allows us to allow for that process to happen?
So I think, what I would offer is I suppose just a reflection on where the built environment sector is at the moment. I have a great deal of optimism as to what the future looks like. We're seeing some amazing solutions come to the market. We're seeing investments, increasingly aligned to reducing carbon and creating places and spaces where people can thrive. So I like the mood music that I'm hearing from investors, from governments and their agencies. But I'm also quite pragmatic in recognising that we don't have the workforce to deliver on these ambitions. Whether we look at it from a volume perspective, how many people do we need, or we look at it from a competency profile perspective, do those people have the right, competencies to deliver in the way that we need them to? And on both of those measures, there has been a steady history of underperformance that runs through the industry, that runs through our skills system. There are a range of reasons that underpin that, but I think what Best and our partners can do is move with a flexibility and agility that many others within the system just are unable to do. And so our approach to providing kind of short, very targeted training interventions before the point of need has proven to be a really effective contribution to the system. Our overarching goal is to mainstream these interventions into the system, and that we've done with varying degrees of success. But I think I would certainly take the position that we have a skills crisis in construction,
Mm-hmm.
and we need to have some really meaningful conversations as to why we're in this position and what we need to do a collective to make progress.
Absolutely.
That's a difficult conversation, I guess, to be having with people as well, isn't it? It's a hard conversation, but it's holding the mirror up to what's happened before, but also understanding that you've got a way ahead
Yeah.
in terms of role modeling a better way to do stuff from now.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think so. And I mean, ultimately, we have, and I genuinely believe that, at the macro level, there's no one that has legitimate, concerns about or legitimate resistance towards having a construction industry that can deliver better, faster, and cheaper outcomes.
Yes.
For the citizens of Scotland. So if we take it back to the very first principle like that, then there's broad general agreement. I think when you start to get into the details of how we achieve that's where, whether it's individuals or organisations, you start to see some of those resistances emerge, and really that's a natural part of any change process. So I think we need to view this as a national change programme.
And I always think with business, it's about showing what those outcomes can be. So using data to lead the way, but then also when we're looking at the data, and this is something that Dinah and I have been talking about quite a lot of late, is that within policy documentation, an awful lot of what has been reported or what goes into those policy documents is at the macro level, and at the micro level it can feel like a very, very different kind of climate, so a lot of the work that we're trying to do, and I guess what I'm really seeing coming through from the work that Best is doing is you're in the business, you're with the people, we're talking about what's going on in the actual learning outcomes and impact that creates, and that it takes time, but it's actually about accountability and transparency. And then there's a huge piece round about the education of what we do with those results, and how we interpret the data, and then how that better then informs policy. But that takes time, and it's like all the little component parts of that. And so yeah, when I think about structural transition, I think about the title of actually Best, and everything you do, each part of that is actually truly reflective of the kind of work that you're trying to bring through, and it's a lot.
Yeah. I think it's some really insightful points you've made there, Kirsty, because the data element of it. You and I have been collaborating with the Construction Leadership Forum around data for over a year now, and I'm really heartened to see that the data literacy that's being demonstrated by leaders in our industry is developing positively. So I don't have rose tinted glasses on here. I recognise that objectively we are still very immature as a sector in the way that we use data. But I think what the data can bring, and I have confidence it will, is support to those who are charged with making big decisions around the direction of our skills system. And I would reflect without offering any specific examples, because it'd probably be unfair to to pick any individuals or organisations out, but I do feel at times that the fear of failure or the fear of getting it wrong can be a more powerful motivator than the prospect of trying something that might work, of being more radical in our thinking. And a big part of that is underpinned by the term that you used, Kirsty, is the accountability term. And colleagues, particularly in government and public sector, they're under a lot of pressure to transform a system with very limited resources. We don't have a culture that's tolerant of significant failure, and we don't always have a culture that's receptive to transformative change. So I think there's a lesson in that. At one end of the spectrum, you've got a very hard view of what the data is. The data is subjective. Okay, there's a subjectivity that you can bring to it, but I think at the other end of that spectrum, there's the deep empathy that is required to work with individuals who are trying to understand and develop and evolve their own data maturity and their understanding of how to use it to drive better decision making. And all of that together makes for part of the challenge we need to overcome. But as I said at the outset, it gives me confidence that we have some of the solutions that we need to make progress, and the data can help us validate some of those decisions as we move ahead.
Yeah, I'm always heartened that we're having these kind of conversations. I think that's one aspect of it, is just that we're acknowledging that that's part of our learning and the journey that we're on all together, and questioning the numbers as well is okay. That's good. And then when we filter that down into the businesses that we're working with, that really is, in the private sector, that's the difference between them being successful and thriving and creating more jobs and all of those other things. It's a tricky juggling act between servicing what public sector needs and the private sector requires to thrive. So it's an incredible space that, or if you like, juncture your work has both. You have to have both views of what's going on in both spaces. It's tricky to find the balance in that. And then, while at the same time being really cognizant of the learner, the individual, the employee in that journey, because ultimately that's what we hope to be able to do, is to encourage more people to join the sector and to see their place and to see that their skills or attributes or competencies can be developed, and that there is roles and a need for them to join the sector. So that's the hard part, I think, is we can look at skills, we can prove where they come from, we can work with the education sector, but in encouraging young people or people to transition across the sector, that attraction piece is that's the tricky bit.
Yeah, indeed. And I mean, there's some really interesting insights in that talent attraction piece, because there's there's a lot of evidence in Skills Development Scotland. They produce semi-regular insights into things like stakeholder perception surveys, probably the best way to describe them. And construction, or careers in construction, regularly feature quite low down in terms of sector attractiveness. And it'll come as no surprise that when you get into the demographics of those who find careers in construction to be an aspiration, they do tend to be young white men from low SIMD or social index and multiple deprivation areas.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I've always taken the view that if we want to have a built environment that meets the needs of our society, then we really need a construction workforce who are representative of that society. And so we've got a lot of work to do in widening the pool from which we recruit. The flip side of that is that we, any notion that the construction industry is struggling to attract a sufficient number of particularly young people just doesn't stack up. Construction courses around the country are highly competitive to get into. There are long waiting lists. Apprenticeship figures remain very healthy,
Mm-hmm.
proportional to other sectors. So we actually have a great talent pipeline for young people to come into the industry. I would argue that we need to diversify that talent pool. We need to widen the funnel to ensure that more people are getting in. And I do think that there's some work to be done to streamline how long it actually takes to get through that pipeline, which is a bit of a contentious issue. But even if we think about the skills and competencies that we'll need 5 years from now, we really need the apprenticeship frameworks, for example, to be in place now
Yes.
to have those people coming through in 5 years' time. So we really need to think about the lag that exists between the point of course design and the realisation of a trained operative.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I was going to touch on that actually. Is there a lag there in the educator space in terms of where people are able to provision these courses, or where you'll have experienced educators? What's happening in that world?
Yeah, I think it's really tough. So, I say this from being, an actor within the college sector. I'm deeply, deeply passionate about the role that colleges play in Scotland. But, I'm also realistic enough to recognise that we have some structural challenges that are getting in the way of us being able to deliver as good a service, as robust a service as we'd like to. And, those challenges, I think, can be broadly condensed down to the recognition that, curriculum design, it takes a bit of time. It's not a quick process. And I think as the pace of industrial transformation quickens, that places real pressure on ensuring that curriculum remains relevant and responsive to industry need. Educator upskilling is the second major problem, and that's with no disrespect whatsoever to our educators who are well trained, well qualified. They come from industry. I think that's one of the real beauty of the college sector, is that the vast majority of lecturers have been practitioners. But again, industry changes really quickly. So even the most talented educator, who's been out of industry for two or 3 years, is needing access to that continual upskilling and continual exposure to the workplace, which can be challenging. The third big challenge is the capital investment required to keep pace with machinery, technology, equipment. I think manufacturers tend to be pretty good at providing colleges with the sponsorship and access to free equipment, but again, the equipment is going out of it's been replaced, usurped. It's been kind of iterated upon and developed at such a quick pace that we struggle as a sector to keep up. So funding challenges aside, funding's always going to be an issue. I think what we do need is to see colleges being given more autonomy, more flexibility to develop new curriculum, to use their educators in different ways that enhances their ability to spend more time with industry, and to really channel government, industry and funding from elsewhere into spaces that can provide that capital investment. I think that's what BEST can do, is act as that centre of excellence to to enable colleges, universities, other training providers to come along and use that kind of leading edge machinery and equipment.
The accreditation process as well for the competency of the skills that are being taught, I think that's a kind of area that I'm quite fascinated about, what role accreditation can play in expediting some of that process. I also think, colleges would like their own autonomy. It's a bit like what we're seeing with the mayors and things like this south of the border, having the budget to be able to spend it to meet the needs of your local population and your learners, and working alongside employers to deliver on what is actually needed would be such a welcome addition to the process, because they're frustrated. Naturally, we're educators. We see what needs to be done. So it's
and that, I mean, that in and of itself, the question of what is needed is multifaceted, Kirsty, because if we take the curriculum that colleges or universities for that matter deliver, in most cases, I think certainly the well-run construction and built environment departments, they have deep connections with industry partners.
Yes.
I think where colleges shine is in that kind of community space where they are deeply engaged with their local community, their local businesses. But if you look at the disconnect between what businesses are saying that they want in the curriculum,
Yes.
and what clients are saying that they need in the workforce, there's not always a match or an alignment between those two things, and it can create a bit of tension. So I suppose it's the overarching question of, are we mobilising our skills system to respond to the future demand that we know is ahead of us?
Mm-hmm.
Or are we using our skills system to close the gaps that we can demonstrate through the data that are sitting behind us? And I'm not suggesting that that's a binary choice, but if you speak to industry partners, they will tend to reflect on the gaps that they've struggled to fill over the last year.
Mm-hmm.
If you speak to clients or to governments, they're thinking about those large-scale infrastructure projects and investments that are ahead, and worrying about whether the workforce will be there to deliver. So I think the answer sits somewhere in the middle, but I'm not convinced that we're having that conversation in a way that's really coordinated and really aligned.
I think we do see that in the numbers. Sorry, on you go, Dinah, as well.
So I was just going to touch on that, because we have that in other industry sectors as well, where we have this forward look of where we need to get to, but we're still chasing our tails trying to do the existing.
Yep.
And how we get to that joined up picture that's like looking at supply and demand and future proofing. It's a complex place to be. And so I suppose what Best does is sit there offering that connective purpose between those different stories, but just articulating that for people. It's like where the cost comes in on that pipeline, because I think people are thinking, well, I want to put my money where the problem is right now.
Mm-hmm.
And other people are thinking, well, I've got to put my money where the problem is going to be in the future.
Mm-hmm.
But you've got people, actual human beings, falling in the gaps of that, aren't you, that aren't going to fit in either of those spaces unless someone is there to do something that strings that together.
Yeah, and I think that's where, so to bring it back to the reason I've always been really intrigued, inspired by the work that that's been done by Skillsminer, is that there is a granularity to the understanding of competence that is incredibly useful when we think about how we might make that transition gradually. And so what I mean by that is that our current approach in the construction industry is to take a very occupationally siloed view of what currently exists and what we need in the future. But the reality is that if we look at the evolving needs of clients and citizens, they're not easily served by having this highly disaggregated workforce who sit in occupational silos. And actually there's this kind of huge untapped potential that runs across all of these occupations, where individuals can be deployed in areas that might be adjacent to their occupation but not core. For example, I think one of the big challenges we're going to need to overcome is the challenge of professional identity and the role that your trade associations and others play, who do amazing work supporting their members. And actually I think the trade associations themselves and the federations and the professional bodies are, they represent the best of what we have in our industry. But the ask that I would put on them is to think really carefully around how they can collaborate and their members can collaborate to almost spread those competencies across the industry.
Yep.
And to enable us to essentially, quite often use the term, reduce the labour intensity of what we do. Quite simply put, if we can have 8 people on a site delivering a construction programme because they have a degree of multidisciplinarity, as opposed to having 10 individuals who only do the things that sit within their occupational silo, we have more of a chance of boosting productivity and delivering better outcomes for clients. So I think what Skillsminer has been able to do is start to provide insight into the competencies that sit within these occupations, the competencies that are most in demand, the transferability that exists between occupations. These are insights that I haven't seen being derived as effectively anywhere else, and I genuinely believe that they are not only invaluable, but they will be critical to us getting our national skills planning approach right for Scotland.
Thank you.
So do you think there's a thing in there for me a little bit? I think that must feel quite threatening for some people if they've identified around that professional identification that they're one thing and does that mean they can be something else? So there's a little bit of that. There's a little bit of worrying that you're having to do two jobs rather than the job that you thought you were doing.
Yep.
So, it's all about change management, isn't it, for people? That's what I mean. I guess what I'm trying to say is we see this movement across agility in the workforce around people not being I-shaped people, they're T-shaped people with a broader range of skills and depth. And then the movement to they've got depth in a couple of areas and another, broader understanding and competency across different things. But as individuals, how does an individual cope with that change, do you think, Douglas?
I mean, I suppose there's two ways to look at it, and I should say when I talk about transferable skills and cross-disciplinary or multidisciplinary learning, I would emphasise that there are some red lines within that, and I think in areas where there's a high degree of regulation or compliance considerations. So I'm thinking electricians, plumbers, heating engineers, gas engineers and things like that. These are deeply specialist roles that shouldn't be attempted by novices or amateurs. But I think when we think about at an individual level, the notion of employability. So what I really want to see is that every individual in Scotland has the opportunity to engage in meaningful learning experiences that enhance their individual competency profile and boost their employability.
Mm-hmm.
So it's about social mobility. It's about being able to make or being empowered to make better choices as to where they want to take their career path. I think from a business perspective, it's very rare for me to speak to a business owner who doesn't tell me that they're really struggling to either attract or retain great talent. And I think even just over the last month or so, the last few months actually, we've seen so many construction businesses go under for very different reasons. But it points towards a real lack of resilience in the industry. And I think about ways of boosting resilience within businesses, particularly the small and micros. It's about having a workforce who are able to respond and adapt and flex to the job ahead. And I think that's where elements of cross-disciplinary working, cross-disciplinary learning can become really, really quite powerful. So I wholly acknowledge there are downsides, Dinah, and I think we see in kind of rogue builders, like a lot of headlines represent the very worst of our industry.
Mm-hmm.
So I certainly wouldn't advocate for non-qualified, non-accredited, non-competent operatives, but I think again there's somewhere in the middle where we can empower individuals to expand their competency profile.
Yeah.
And placing that in the heart of the business and the impact that brings, I think that's one step of it. I think that once people see that greater diversity in the workplace leads to higher productivity and, the bottom line is being affected because of that, increased revenues and profit is always going to win over hearts and minds in any private sector business. So I think, and linking that to impact, because an awful lot of the businesses that we engage with are very focused on impact and job creation in the areas that they are operating in or they want to go and operate in, and they see that as such a crucial aspect of their own integral growth. Internationally, I've seen one or two organisations now that have broken down this notion of departments and teams and even seniority in the business. It's more based on tasks and a kind of flatline view on positions within the organisation, but I would say that's probably more in the digital space right now. And but it'll be interesting to see how some of their experimental work in that way really plays out. And if it does work, then wow, what learning can we take from that? I quite like this idea of we're no longer just looking at sectors as well. I do believe that transferable skills come from every sector, and it's really amazing when you start to plot exactly where 60% of someone's profile actually has come from, and I think that's another reason why Dinah and I always start our conversations off with where have you come from? How did you get here? More often than not, it alludes to what maybe some of those future steps will be. And we can say that, hey, because we can look over our shoulders and kind of have hindsight on things. But for young people, it's difficult to kind of imagine what that might look like in the future for them too. And probably because a lot of the jobs now, we just don't know what those titles are going to be and how those skills are going to be used. And but I think that's also another real opportunity, you know. So the use of AI, auto-generative technologies, and all this other kind of amazing things that are coming through, I keep bringing it back to having purpose. You know, I do
Yeah,
think that when you feel aligned to that or curious about learning in some kind of way, the rest of those skills kind of take care of themselves. You know, you use that as your pen or your paintbrush or the respective tool that you're going to go and dig a big hole with. You know, so it's all of that. And so I wonder how much that will play a part in the decisions that our future workforce will make.
yeah. I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think to bring it back to the data, what we have, we take, we've been playing around with the data in the skills space for some time now, so it's not a new concept. The maturity is developing, as I mentioned earlier, but the evolution of AI is transforming the way that we can work with data and the insights that we can derive from it as lay people, who, we're not data scientists by any stretch, but I think what it is giving rise to is the ability to look at job roles to the level of granularity that you're describing, Kirsty, at that task-based competency level. It allows us to develop these competency profiles, and essentially interrogate the question of, does our competency profile supply meet our competency profile demand?
Yes.
And that at a task level is almost wholly independent of occupations or occupational standards. And I think probably the uncomfortable question that arises from those insights is, so there will be new job roles, of course.
Yep.
But in the case where, if we take any apprenticeship framework or college program or university program, if what the data is telling us is that there's only 20%, 30%, whatever, of a curriculum that actually matches what is required in industrial practice, what do we do? Because the curriculum is so intrinsically tied to these identities, to these occupational standards and silos, that we're ultimately faced with, being slightly facetious here, but trying to do the wrong thing, ever increasing efficiency,
Mm-hmm.
or stepping back and being brave enough to try and do the right thing, appreciating that it's likely to cause significant disruption. And I think what Skillsminer again is enabling us to do is to start seeing some of those insights emerge, and start the very uncomfortable conversations that ultimately will drive sectoral transformation.
I think especially around qualification data, you know, I think that's that I'm smiling reflecting back on another project that we've done that allowed us to understand the value of a qualification. You know, how many jobs did it lead to? How many other qualifications and where else does it take you to, not just within the sector but across other sectors, other occupations, and then very quickly you can identify the one, what's the fastest route or the cheapest way to get there or the most cost effective way to upskill people. So I think that there is some tough questions and that we all need to kind of look at, and it comes down to value always. You know, what works and what do we need to start thinking about in terms of that bigger picture piece, you know, but that's hard and that won't always be our decision to make, sadly.
We looked at having this conversation with AMRC around
Yes.
manufacturing as well, Douglas, with looking at new roles, brand new roles
Yep.
that don't exist, transitionary roles, roles that will exist for a time
Mm-hmm.
but will not exist forever.
Yep.
And then changing transformative roles that will change and you'll have to learn and do something new with them all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess it'll be the same sort of in the landscape of built environment, won't it, really? That you'll
Yeah,
have that understanding, but the more you know, the easier it is to make decisions on that, I guess.
That's it. I mean, to bring it back to the opening of our conversation, so I consider myself to be incredibly privileged for having had a really special apprenticeship experience as a stonemason. If I think about stonemasonry as a trade, a craft, or an occupation, it hasn't evolved too much for thousands of years. We still take big lumps of stone and we hit them with bits of metal to shape them into what we need them to be. So, the technologies have evolved, of course, but the basic principle of stonemasonry is the same as broadly as it's always been. And the reason I bring that up is that in the construction industry, like many other sectors, we have this long history. We have traditions, we have cultures that are deeply ingrained in the way that we think and plan and communicate. And they inform that notion of the past always being in front of us. For many of these traditions, many of these occupations, that's absolutely true. When we look jealously across at these kind of really fast moving, particularly tech sector roles, they're able to emerge and evolve and adapt very quickly, often because they don't have this re-engineering process to go through. They don't have the traditions and cultures to unpick. I think we just need to be very honest about that this is a change process. It's going to take time. We're going to come up against people and organisations who are quite resistant.
Yep.
But to my earlier point, we do this through articulating a clear and inclusive vision and genuinely being open to working with everyone, a deep sense of empathy, compassion, and a desire to collaborate. And we can make change, we can re-engineer this system. But we shouldn't kid ourselves about the challenges that we'll need to overcome along the way.
No, it's an inheritance.
Very human that we're holding on to different things, and rightly so, and that and how we move into something else. It's that transitionary mindset and approach to doing things. I think that's really important that we always think about. We talk about putting the human at the sort of the heart of what we do, don't we, Kirsty, really, and thinking about them as well as it's not just data and skills, it's human beings. It's always human beings. We want everyone to leave their experience of work feeling okay about what they're doing and, enjoying it. And if not enjoying it, knowing it's serving a purpose or, that kind of thing. And it's quite important to us. And I guess one of the things that I was going to ask, and we ask it quite a lot on our podcasts as well, is has there been a person, Douglas, in your career or advice that you've been given in your career that's really, you remember it, it's stuck with you?
That's a hard one. Goodness, I've had so many amazing people work with me over the years. I wouldn't even know where to begin. Do you know, I'm going to identify my first trades person, Mark Warren, at Hunter Clark. Sadly, he's passed away now. But he was a hard taskmaster. So he didn't suffer fools gladly. And he was a very, very talented stonemason. And I think, looking back what he's seen, a reference to earlier, I cannot emphasise just how rubbish I was. Like, really, the worst person who ever tried to be a stonemason ever in history. And Mark seen that, but what he also seen was a young person who was committed to trying and failing and trying again and trying again. It was a perseverance, and without without being too explicit around it, he gave me an equal measure of critical feedback, but the space to learn and develop and grow. And I think his approach, which wasn't perfect by any stretch, has really underpinned the way I think about developing people as an educator. And now my role as a leader of an organisation, it reinforces my belief that it's not so much what any individual can do. It's the intent and the commitment that sits behind their own growth journey. And so in that respect, to have the patience and frankly the pleasure at seeing someone develop is probably my biggest motivation as a professional today.
Thank you so much. Where can people come to find out more about BEST, and how can they get involved in BEST Fest and all those good things?
Yeah, so the easiest way to get involved is to look at our website. And so you can search for Built Environment Smarter Transformation or visit www.best.build. I should say there's a hyphen between the E and the S of
Just to keep us all
BEST. You'll find it. Our BEST Fest, a 3-month celebration of the built environment.
Mm-hmm.
And I will say, despite the I suppose the kind of challenging outlook that we've discussed today, we have an incredible industry who are delivering life-changing outcomes all around the world. Actually, the BEST Fest Summit is our annual massive celebration of all of the best things that are happening in our built environment community.
Is an amazing bunch of people, I have to say. It's always an interesting conversation with everybody. I'm just always amazed at what project work people are up to. I think that's any meetings I attend in this space, I'm just like, wow. I think it's also because you can see what they've built. That's the other thing. It's not like, oh, I've got a couple of algorithms I've been working on a small piece of functionality. It's like, I built a whole new house or a whole new system. And you just go, what? And the same time, it took us to build like one algorithm. And they're like, yep, it's great.
Good stuff.
I know. Thank you so much for your time, Douglas. I know you're a busy.
Well, thanks for the invite. Yeah, it's been a great chat. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Skillsminer podcast. You can find more episodes and videos about Skillsminer on our YouTube channel, and you can listen to more podcasts on our Spotify. Thank you.